Look at yourself." Helen's voice cut through the wedding hall like a knife. The music stopped, the guests turned, and before I could even understand what was happening, she lifted the glass of red wine in her hand and threw it straight at my chest. Cold wine splashed across my white wedding dress. The stain spread quickly, dark red against the cheap fabric. For a few seconds, no one said a word. Not the guests, not the wedding planner, not even Mark, my fiancé. The man I was supposed to marry in less than 10 minutes. Helen looked me up and down with disgust, then laughed loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "You really thought you could marry into this family wearing a $50 dress?" A few people gasped. Someone whispered behind me. I stood there, frozen, holding my bouquet so tightly that my fingers began to ache. That dress was not expensive. I knew that. It was not made by a famous designer. It did not come from a luxury bridal shop. It did not have diamonds, pearls, or a price tag that could impress people like Helen. But it was mine. I had bought it with my own money. I had chosen it because for one brief moment when I tried it on, I felt like a bride. But Helen saw only the price. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "You are nothing," she hissed. "A poor girl with no family name, no status, and no place in our world. Did you really think my son would lower himself for someone like you?" I did not answer her. I looked past her. I looked at Mark. He stood beside the altar in his expensive black suit, his face pale, his lips slightly open. I waited for him to move, to speak, to take one step toward me, to tell his mother she had gone too far. But he did nothing. He just lowered his eyes, and in that moment I finally understood. Helen was cruel, but Mark had allowed her to be cruel. For 2 years, I had made excuses for him. I told myself he was just afraid of conflict. I told myself he loved me but did not know how to stand up to his mother. I told myself that once we were married, things would change. But standing there in a ruined wedding dress in front of hundreds of strangers, I realized the truth. A man who stays silent while you are being humiliated is not protecting peace. He is choosing a side. And Mark had just chosen his. Helen smiled, thinking she had won. She thought I would cry. She thought I would beg. She thought I would run out of that hall like a broken woman, ashamed of my cheap dress and my so-called poor background. The guests thought the same thing. To them, I was just a nobody. A girl who had tried to climb into a rich family and had finally been put back in her place. But there was one thing none of them knew. The hotel they were standing in, the chandeliers above their heads, the flowers lining the aisle, the champagne being poured at every table, even the business deal Helen had been bragging about all morning. All of it belonged to my father. And in just a few minutes, the woman who called me worthless would discover that the $50 dress she had mocked was not the reason I did not belong in her family. It was the reason her family would never belong in my world. 2 years before Helen ruined my wedding dress in front of everyone, I met Mark in the most ordinary way possible. Not at a luxury party, not at a business event, not through powerful families or expensive introductions. I met him on a rainy Tuesday afternoon inside a small coffee shop near downtown. The place was crowded that day. People were rushing in from the rain, shaking water from their coats, complaining about traffic, and fighting over the last empty tables. I was sitting alone by the window with my laptop open, pretending to work while secretly watching the rain slide down the glass. That was when Mark walked in. He looked completely soaked. His dark hair was messy, his suit jacket was dripping, and one of his shoes made a strange squeaking sound every time he took a step. He looked embarrassed, tired, and very human. Not like the polished, confident man I would later see standing beside his mother in expensive restaurants. That day, he was just a man caught in the rain. He ordered a black coffee, turned around, and realized there were no empty seats left. For a moment, he stood there awkwardly, holding his cup, looking around the room like someone who had lost a small battle against life. I do not know why I did it. Maybe because he looked harmless. Maybe because I felt sorry for him. Or maybe because, at that time, I still believed small acts of kindness could lead to beautiful things. I moved my bag from the chair across from me and said, "You can sit here if you want." He looked surprised. Then he smiled. It was a warm smile, simple, a little shy, the kind of smile that made a person seem honest. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded. He sat down, placed his coffee carefully on the table, and thanked me like I had done something far more important than saving him from standing in wet shoes. That was how it started. With rain, with coffee, with a stranger's smile. We talked for almost an hour. At first, it was just polite conversation. The weather, work, traffic. Then somehow the conversation became easier. He told me he worked in his family's real estate business. I told him I worked in hospitality management. That was true, but not the whole truth. I did not tell him that the company I worked for belonged to my father. I did not tell him that I was not just an employee, but someone being trained to one day help run the entire group. I did not tell him about the hotels, the restaurants, the investment properties, or the fact that my father's name could open doors that most people could only dream of entering. I simply told him I had a normal job, because I wanted to be seen as a normal person. That had always been difficult for me. When people knew who my father was, they changed. Their smiles became wider. Their voices became softer. Their compliments became cheaper. Some people wanted my friendship. Some wanted my money. Some wanted access. Some wanted to stand close enough to my family name that they could feel important. So over time, I learned to hide parts of myself. I wore simple clothes. I drove a modest car. I avoided talking about my family. And when someone asked too many questions, I gave answers that were true but incomplete. My father never liked that. He used to tell me, "Sarah, people should respect you whether they know your last name or not." And I always replied, "That is exactly why I do not want them to know." I wanted to know who people were before they knew who I was. And when I met Mark, I thought I had finally found someone who liked me for myself. He did not ask what my father did. He did not ask where I lived. He did not ask how much money I made. He asked what kind of books I liked. He asked why I always looked out the window before answering difficult questions. He asked if I believed people could truly change. At the time, those questions felt deep. Now, looking back, I realize I was so hungry for sincerity that I mistook curiosity for character. After that first meeting, Mark asked for my number. I almost said no, not because I did not like him, but because something in me was always careful. I had grown up watching people perform kindness in front of money. I knew how charming people could be when they wanted something, but Mark did not feel like that. He felt gentle, a little unsure of himself, different from the arrogant men my father's business partners always tried to introduce me to. So I gave him my number, and for the next few weeks he texted me every morning. Nothing dramatic, nothing too romantic, just simple messages. "Did you get to work safely? Remember to eat lunch. The rain is back. I hope you brought an umbrella this time." Those messages made me smile. Maybe they should not have meant so much, but they did, because for once someone seemed to care about the small details of my day. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant. Not expensive, not impressive, just warm lights, soft music, and pasta that was honestly a little too salty. Mark apologized 3 times for choosing the place. I laughed and told him I liked it, and I did. Not because the food was perfect, but because he seemed nervous, real. He listened when I talked. He remembered small things. He opened doors without making a show of it. He walked on the outside of the sidewalk when cars passed too close. He made me feel safe. That was the first thing I loved about him. Or maybe that was the first lie I told myself. Because safety is not about how gently someone holds your hand when everything is easy. Safety is about what they do when standing beside you becomes difficult. But I did not know that yet. For the first few months, Mark was everything I thought I wanted. He was kind, attentive, patient. He never pushed me to talk about my family. He never made me feel small. He told me I was different from anyone he had ever met, and I believed him. When he met my friends, they liked him. They said he seemed polite, stable, a little reserved maybe, but good-hearted. My best friend, Emily, was the only one who looked uncertain. After dinner one night, while Mark was outside taking a phone call, she leaned across the table and whispered, "He seems nice, Sarah, but nice is not the same as strong." I frowned. "What does that mean?" She glanced toward the window where Mark stood with his back to us. "It means he avoids discomfort. I can see it. He says the right things but when something tense happens, he disappears into silence." I laughed it off. I told her she was overthinking. I told her Mark was just calm. I told her not every man needed to be loud to be strong. Emily did not argue. She only said, just make sure his silence does not become your burden. At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. Now I wish I had listened. 6 months into our relationship, Mark told me he wanted me to meet his mother. He said it casually, over dinner, while cutting into his steak. My mom wants to meet you. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Your mom? He nodded. She has been asking about you. The way he said it made my stomach tighten, not because meeting a parent was unusual, but because his voice changed when he mentioned her. It became careful, smaller, like a grown man suddenly remembering he was still someone's child. What did you tell her about me? I asked. Mark wiped his mouth with a napkin. Just that you work in hospitality, that you are smart, sweet, independent. I waited. And? He looked confused. And what? I gave him a small smile. And did you tell her anything else? He looked down at his plate. No, there is not much else to tell, right? The words were harmless on the surface, but something about them stung. There is not much else to tell. I wondered if that was truly how he saw me, a simple girl with a simple job and a simple life. I could have corrected him. I could have told him everything right then, about my father, about the company, about the fact that I had grown up around the same wealthy circles his mother probably worshipped. But I did not. Part of me wanted to see what would happen. Part of me wanted to know whether his family could respect a woman without a famous last name attached to her. So I said nothing. I only asked, is she strict? Mark gave a short laugh. That laugh should have warned me. It was not the laugh of someone amused. It was the laugh of someone nervous. My mother just has high standards, he said. High standards. That was how Mark described cruelty before I knew it was cruelty. A week later, I stood in front of my mirror choosing what to wear to dinner with his mother. I chose a navy blue dress, simple, elegant, not flashy. I tied my hair back, put on small earrings, and kept my makeup soft. I wanted to look respectful. Not rich, not poor, just myself. Mark picked me up at 7. When I got into his car, he looked me over and smiled. You look beautiful, I smiled back. For a moment I felt calm. Then he added, my mom might seem a little intense at first. Do not take it personally. The calm disappeared. What does that mean? He kept his eyes on the road. She just cares a lot about family reputation. I turned slightly toward him. And should I be worried? No, he said quickly, too quickly. Just be yourself. But as we drove toward his mother's house, I noticed his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. That was the first sign. The second sign came when we arrived. Helen's house was large, cold, and perfectly arranged. Not beautiful in a warm way. Beautiful like a museum where no one was allowed to touch anything. Tall white columns stood at the entrance. The garden was trimmed so precisely it looked almost artificial. Inside, the floors shone like glass. Every painting, every vase, every piece of furniture seemed chosen not for comfort but for price. Helen was waiting in the living room. She did not walk toward me. She did not smile. She stood near the fireplace in a cream-colored dress, holding a glass of wine, looking at me the way someone might look at a stain on expensive fabric. Mark cleared his throat. Mom, this is Sarah. I stepped forward and offered my hand. It is nice to meet you, Mrs. Whitmore. Helen looked at my hand, then at my dress, then at my shoes. Only after a long, uncomfortable pause did she finally take my hand. Her fingers were cold. Her grip was light, almost insulting. So, she said, you are the girl my son has been spending so much time with. I smiled politely. Yes, I have heard a lot about you. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Really? How flattering. The dinner had not even started, and I already felt like I was being tested. At the table, Helen asked questions. Not normal questions, not kind questions. Questions designed to measure me. Where did I grow up? Where did I study? What exactly did I do for work? Did my parents live nearby? What did my father do? Each question sounded polite, but every word carried a hidden blade. I answered carefully, truthfully, but simply. I told her my father was involved in business. She tilted her head. What kind of business? Hospitality, I said, her mouth curved slightly. Hotels, yes. How interesting. But her tone said the opposite. Then she asked, and your mother? I paused. My mother had died when I was young. That was not a subject I shared easily. She passed away when I was a child, I said quietly. For the first time that evening, Helen looked almost pleased, not because she felt sympathy, but because she had found a weakness. "Oh," she said, "so you were raised without a mother." Mark shifted in his chair. I waited for him to say something. He did not. Helen took a slow sip of wine. "That explains a certain softness in your manners. A mother is very important in teaching a girl how to carry herself properly." The table went silent. I felt the insult land, quietly, cleanly, right where she intended. Mark looked uncomfortable, but again he said nothing. So I smiled, because that was what I had been taught to do in rooms where people mistook cruelty for class. "I was raised by my father," I said. "He did his best." Helen's smile sharpened. "I am sure he did." That night, I went home with a heavy feeling in my chest. Mark apologized in the car. "She did not mean it that way." I looked out the window. "Yes, she did." He sighed. "My mom can be difficult, but once she gets to know you, she will come around." I wanted to believe him, so I did. That was my mistake, because Helen had already decided who I was. To her, I was not Sarah. I was not a woman who loved her son. I was not someone with dreams, dignity, or a heart that could be hurt. I was a poor girl, an outsider, a threat. And from that night on, Helen made it her mission to remind me exactly where she thought I belonged. At first, Helen's insults were small, so small that if I repeated them to someone else, I knew they might sound harmless. A look, a pause, a smile that came half a second too late. A sentence wrapped in politeness but sharpened underneath. She never attacked me loudly in the beginning. That would have made things too obvious. Helen was smarter than that. She knew how to make cruelty look like concern. The first time she commented on my clothes, we were having lunch at an expensive restaurant she had chosen. The kind of restaurant where the menu did not list prices and every waiter spoke softly as if noise itself was poor manners. I wore a simple cream blouse and black trousers. Clean, neat, respectful. I thought I looked fine. Helen looked at me for 3 seconds, then said, "You have a very practical style." I smiled, unsure whether it was a compliment. "Thank you." She took a sip of sparkling water. "Practical is good, especially when one has to be careful with money." Mark looked down at his plate. I felt the first sting. It was quick, almost invisible, but it landed. I forced myself to smile. Helen's eyes moved over my blouse again. "Yes," she said. "I can see that." That was how she did it. She never said, "You look cheap." She said, "You are simple." She never said, "You do not belong here." She said, "You must feel overwhelmed in places like this." She never said, "Your family is beneath ours." She said, "People from different backgrounds sometimes struggle to adjust." Every insult had a silk ribbon tied around it, and every time Mark pretended not to notice. After that lunch, I told him how uncomfortable I felt. We were walking back to his car, and my chest still felt tight. "Your mother does not like me," I said. Mark sighed as if I had brought up something exhausting. "She barely knows you." "That is the problem. She already decided who I am." He opened the car door for me. "She is just protective." I stopped before getting in. "Protective of you or protective of her image?" His face changed, only slightly, but I saw it. "Sarah, please do not start a fight over nothing." Over nothing. That phrase stayed with me, because to Mark, it was nothing. To him, every small humiliation was just a moment to survive. To me, each one became another stone in my chest, but I loved him. And love has a dangerous way of making intelligent people patient with things they should never tolerate. So I tried harder. I dressed more carefully when I knew Helen would be there. I chose quieter colors, more elegant shoes, less jewelry, then more jewelry, then no jewelry at all. I kept trying to guess which version of myself would offend her the least. None of them worked. If I wore something simple, she called it plain. If I wore something nice, she asked if I had borrowed it. If I spoke too little, I was uneducated. If I spoke too much, I was trying too hard. If I helped in the kitchen, I lacked class. If I sat with the guests, I lacked humility. Helen had created a game I could never win, and Mark kept telling me to keep playing. "She just needs time," he would say. "She is not used to you yet. She has high expectations. She treats everyone like this." But she did not treat everyone like that. I watched her with other women, women from wealthy families, women whose parents owned companies, law firms, private clinics, investment groups. Helen smiled at them before they even finished speaking. She touched their arms warmly. She laughed at jokes that were not funny. She praised their dresses, their careers, their families, their taste. With them, Helen was charming. With me, she was a judge. One evening, Mark invited me to a charity dinner hosted by his mother's social circle. I did not want to go. By then, I had already learned that every event with Helen felt less like a gathering and more like an interview I was expected to fail. But Mark looked so hopeful. It would mean a lot to me, he said, so I went. The dinner was held in a private ballroom with gold curtains, crystal lights, and round tables covered in white roses. Everyone looked expensive. The women wore silk gowns and diamond earrings. The men laughed too loudly and shook hands as if every conversation was a transaction. Helen introduced me to a group of women near the entrance. "This is Sarah," she said. Then she paused. "Just long enough. Mark's girlfriend." One woman smiled politely. "How lovely, and what do you do, Sarah?" "I work in hospitality management," I said. Helen gave a soft little laugh. She is very modest about it. For one second I thought she was going to praise me. Then she added, "Mostly hotel operations, I believe. Very hands-on." The women smiled in that careful way rich people smile when they are deciding where to place you. One of them said, "Oh, how hard-working." Hard-working. Another word that sounded kind but felt like a box. Helen continued, "I always say there is dignity in honest work." I looked at her. She was smiling, sweetly, publicly, perfectly. But I heard what she really meant. "You are labor. We are legacy." Mark stood beside me, holding a glass of champagne, pretending to study the room. I waited for him to say something, anything. "She is excellent at what she does. She's one of the smartest people I know. I am proud of her." But he said nothing. Again. Later that night, I found him alone on the balcony. The city lights glittered below us. Music floated through the glass doors behind us. I stood beside him and said, "Why do you let her do that?" He did not look at me. "Do what?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know exactly what." He rubbed his forehead. "Sarah, tonight is important for my family. Can we not make it about this?" My throat tightened. "About this?" He turned to me then, frustrated. "My mother is difficult, yes, but you also take things too personally." The words hit harder than Helen's insults, because they came from him, the person who was supposed to see me, the person who was supposed to understand why it hurt. I stared at him. Too personally? He softened immediately, as if he realized he had gone too far. "I just mean, you are sensitive." Sensitive. Another word people use when they do not want to admit they have allowed someone to hurt you. I looked through the glass doors. Helen was inside, laughing with her friends, looking elegant and untouchable. I wondered what would happen if I told them the truth. That my father owned more hotels than everyone in that room combined. That the charity dinner they were attending had sponsors connected to my family's company. That some of the people Helen was trying so hard to impress had spent years trying to get a meeting with my father. I could have destroyed her confidence with one sentence. But I did not, because I still wanted to believe love should not need a family name as proof. I wanted Mark to defend me because I was his partner, not because I was powerful, not because my father was rich, not because humiliating me might cost his family something. I wanted him to choose me when he thought I had nothing. So I stayed silent, and Helen mistook my silence for weakness. After that night, she became bolder. She began inviting me to family dinners, only to ignore me for most of the evening. She corrected my pronunciation of expensive wines. She asked whether I knew how to use certain forks. She once told a waiter to bring me something simple because she assumed the menu would be too confusing for me. At Mark's cousin's engagement party, she introduced every woman by her achievements. "This is Amanda. Her father is a judge. This is Claire. She just returned from Paris. This is Vivian. Her family owns half the properties on the east side." Then she turned to me. "And this is Sarah. She is very sweet. Sweet. That was all I was allowed to be. Not intelligent, not capable, not accomplished, just sweet. Like a small harmless thing Mark had picked up somewhere and brought home by mistake. I smiled through it again and again. But every smile cost me something. One afternoon, Helen invited me to tea. Just the two of us. I knew it was not kindness. Still, I went. Her living room looked the same as always. Perfect, cold, expensive. She poured tea into delicate porcelain cups, pushed one toward me. For a while, she said nothing. Then she placed her cup down and looked directly at me. "Sarah, I will be honest with you." My stomach tightened. "I do not think you are a bad girl, as if I were a child being evaluated. But you and Mark come from different worlds." I kept my voice calm. "Different how?" Helen smiled. "You know how." I did not blink. "No, I would like you to explain." For the first time, her smile weakened, only for a second. Then she leaned back. "Marriage is not just about love. It is about family, reputation, education, culture, connections. A man like Mark needs a wife who can stand beside him without embarrassing him." The room went quiet. There it was, not hidden, not wrapped in politeness, the truth. I placed my cup down carefully. "And you think I would embarrass him?" Helen tilted her head, pretending to be gentle. "I think you would struggle." "With what?" "With the life he was born into." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the life she was describing was smaller than the life I had spent years trying to escape. I thought of my father's boardrooms, the private jets I hated taking, the hotel openings where hundreds of cameras flashed, the business dinners where billion-dollar decisions were discussed between dessert and coffee. Helen thought I would struggle with her little world of country clubs and dinner parties, but I said none of that. Instead, I asked, "Does Mark know you invited me here to say this?" She looked away. That was answer enough. I stood up. "Thank you for the tea, Mrs. Whitmore." Her voice sharpened. "You should think carefully, Sarah. Love fades, reality does not." I turned toward her. "For once, we agree." Then I walked out. Outside, the air felt cold against my face. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from anger. That night, Mark called me 13 times. I did not answer. Then he came to my apartment. When I opened the door, he looked worried. "My mom told me you left upset." I crossed my arms. "Did she tell you why?" He hesitated. "She said she tried to have an honest conversation with you." I laughed softly. "Of course she did. She told me I would embarrass you." Mark closed his eyes. "She should not have said that." "No," I said. "She should not have believed it." He stepped closer. "Sarah, I am sorry. I wanted his apology to heal something. I really did. But by then, apologies had started to feel like bandages placed over wounds that kept being reopened." "Are you?" I asked. He looked hurt. "Of course I am." "Then tell her to stop." He was silent. There it was again, that familiar silence. I watched him struggle, not because he did not know what the right answer was, but because the right answer required courage, and courage was the one thing Mark never seemed to have when his mother was in the room. Finally, he said, "I will talk to her." I wanted to believe him. Again. So I nodded. Again. And for a little while, Helen did become quieter. Not kinder, just quieter. Her insults became looks, her judgment became silence, her disapproval settled over every room like invisible smoke. But underneath that silence, something worse was growing. Because Helen had realized something important. I was not leaving. And if she could not scare me away with small humiliations, she would need a bigger one. One public enough to break me, one cruel enough to make sure I would never dare come back. She was waiting for the right moment. And eventually Mark gave it to her, the proposal. Mark proposed to me on a Friday evening. It was not dramatic. There were no fireworks, no string quartet, no crowd of people clapping around us. He took me back to the same coffee shop where we had first met. The rain was falling again, just like it had on that first Tuesday afternoon. We sat by the window at the same small table with 2 cups of coffee between us. For a while, we talked about ordinary things. Work, dinner plans, a movie he wanted to watch. Then Mark became quiet. Too quiet. I looked at him and noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "Are you okay?" I asked. He nodded. Then he reached into his coat pocket. My heart stopped before I even saw the ring. When he opened the small velvet box, his eyes were soft, nervous, hopeful. "Sarah," he said, his voice trembling, "I know I have not always been perfect." That sentence should have made me pause. But in that moment, all I could see was the man I had loved for almost 2 years, the man who had texted me every morning, the man who had held my hand during quiet walks, the man I still wanted to believe could become stronger. "I love you," he continued, "and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" For 1 second, I forgot everything. I forgot Helen. I forgot the insults. I forgot the silent dinners and the cold smiles and the way Mark always looked away when things became hard. I saw only the rain behind him, the ring in his hand, the fear in his eyes, and the future I had tried so hard to protect. So I said yes. Mark let out a breath like he had been holding it for years. He stood, pulled me into his arms, and kissed my forehead. For that brief moment, I was happy. Truly happy. I wanted to believe the proposal meant something had changed. I wanted to believe Mark had chosen me. I wanted to believe marriage would give him the courage dating had not. But happiness can make a person blind, and mine lasted less than 24 hours. The next morning, Mark told his mother. I was not there. But I knew from the way he called me afterward that the conversation had not gone well. His voice was tight, careful, the same voice he always used after speaking to Helen. She was surprised, he said. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the ring on my finger. Surprised good or surprised bad? He exhaled. She just needs time. I closed my eyes. There it was again. Time. Helen always needed time. Time to adjust. Time to accept. Time to stop treating me like something Mark had dragged in from the street. But somehow, the more time I gave her, the worse she became. What did she say? I asked. Mark was silent. Mark? She said we were moving too fast. We have been together for almost 2 years. I know. What else? Another pause. Then he said, she thinks marriage is a serious decision. I almost laughed. That is all? She said she wants to talk to us. When? Tonight. Of course. Helen never waited when she wanted control. That evening, Mark drove me to her house. I wore a pale gray dress and the engagement ring he had given me. It felt strange on my hand, beautiful but heavy, like a promise I was not sure he could keep. Helen was waiting in the dining room. Not the living room this time. The dining room. Formal, cold, prepared. There were 3 place settings on the table, but no food. Only water glasses, folded napkins, and Helen sitting at the head of the table like a judge waiting for court to begin. She looked at my ring first, not at my face. The diamond was small, simple, chosen by Mark. I loved it because he had chosen it. Helen looked at it as if it offended her. Well, she said, I suppose congratulations are expected. Mark shifted beside me. Mom. Helen raised a hand. I am being polite. I sat down slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore, she smiled. You may call me Helen. After all, it seems you intend to join the family. The way she said it made the word family sound like a locked room. Mark sat beside me. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Helen folded her hands on the table. I will be direct. I almost wanted to smile. Helen had always been direct. She had simply hidden it behind manners. I do not approve of this engagement. Mark's face tightened. Mom, please. No, Helen said sharply. You need to hear this before you make a mistake you cannot undo. A mistake. That was what I was. Not a person, not his fiancée. A mistake. I kept my voice calm. Why do you think this is a mistake? Helen looked at me, almost pleased that I had asked. Because marriage is not a romantic fantasy. It is a union between families. I nodded slowly. And you believe my family is not good enough? I believe we know very little about your family. That is not the same thing. Her eyes narrowed. You are very confident for someone in your position. My position. There it was, again. Mark reached for my hand under the table. I let him take it, but his hand was cold. Helen continued. Mark has responsibilities. Our family has a reputation. We have built our name over generations. That was not true. Mark's family had money, yes, but not old money. Not the kind Helen liked to pretend they had. His father had made a fortune in real estate, and after he died, Helen turned that fortune into a personality. She spoke of legacy as if she had inherited a kingdom. But I said nothing. Helen leaned forward. Do you understand what it means to be part of a family like ours? I looked at her carefully. I understand what it means to be part of a family. Her smile hardened. That is not what I asked. Mark squeezed my hand gently. A silent warning. Do not push her. Do not make this worse. Do not force me to choose. So I stayed quiet. Again. Helen took my silence as permission. If this engagement continues, there will be expectations. What kind of expectations? I asked. For one, the wedding must be handled properly. Mark blinked. Mom, we have not even started planning yet. Exactly, which is why I'm saying this now. She turned back to me. No cheap venues, no ordinary food, no embarrassing little homemade decorations, no guest list full of people who do not understand etiquette. My face went still. People? Helen tilted her head. Your side, dear. Dear. That word in her mouth felt like poison. I thought of my father, a man who had built an empire from nothing, a man who still remembered every employee's name, a man who treated waiters, drivers, and hotel cleaners with more respect than Helen had ever shown me. I thought of my mother, whose picture still sat beside my father's bed. I thought of the people who loved me before they knew what I could give them, and Helen called them embarrassing. Mark finally spoke. "Mom, that is enough." For 1 second, hope moved through me. Small, dangerous. Helen looked at him. "Excuse me?" Mark swallowed. "I said that is enough." The room froze. I turned toward him. For the first time, he had said the words I needed. For the first time, he had drawn a line. Helen stared at him as if he had slapped her. Then her face changed. Not angry, wounded. It was frightening how quickly she could become fragile when control stopped working. "I see," she said softly. "So this is what happens now? She comes into your life and suddenly your mother becomes the enemy?" Mark's courage flickered. I saw it happen. His shoulders lowered. His grip on my hand loosened. "Mom, that is not what I meant." Helen looked away. "No, I understand. I am only the woman who raised you. I am only the one who stood by this family after your father died. I am only the person trying to protect you." Mark closed his eyes, and just like that, the line he had drawn disappeared. I pulled my hand away, not dramatically, quietly, but he noticed. He looked at me with guilt in his eyes. Helen noticed too, and for the first time that evening she smiled, because she had won again. After that night, wedding planning became a battlefield. Not between Mark and me, between Helen and everyone else. She took control immediately. She said it was because she had experience. She said she knew the right vendors, the right venue, the right flowers, the right guest list. But what she really wanted was ownership. This would not be my wedding. It would be Helen's performance. A public announcement that her son was marrying someone she considered beneath him, but that she was generous enough to tolerate. I suggested a small ceremony. She laughed, actually laughed. "A small ceremony? Sarah, this is not a backyard birthday party," Mark said. "Maybe we should consider what Sarah wants." Helen turned to him. "And what does Sarah want? Paper plates and grocery store flowers." He said nothing after that. The venue was chosen without me. The menu was chosen without me. The flowers were chosen without me. Even the invitations were redesigned because Helen said my choice looked too ordinary. Every time I objected, Mark asked me to compromise. "Just this once," he would say. But it was never just once. It was the venue, then the flowers, then the guest list, then the seating chart, then the music, then the photographer, then the bridesmaids' dresses, then my dress. The dress became Helen's obsession. She wanted me to wear a designer gown from a bridal boutique owned by one of her friends. The price was obscene, more than some people paid for a car. When I saw it, I immediately said no. Helen's eyebrows rose. "No, no," I said. "It is beautiful, but it is not me." Her eyes moved slowly over my face. "Not you? I want something simpler." She laughed under her breath. "Of course you do." Mark touched my elbow. "Sarah, maybe just try it on." I looked at him. I said no. Helen's expression cooled. "A bride's dress reflects the family she is entering." "No," I said quietly. "It reflects the woman wearing it." For a moment we simply stared at each other. The saleswoman stood nearby, pretending not to listen. Mark looked like he wanted to vanish. Finally, Helen smiled. "Very well, choose whatever makes you comfortable." That should have worried me, because Helen never surrendered. She only changed tactics. 2 weeks later, I found my dress in a small bridal outlet across town. It cost $50. Not because it was ugly, not because it was worthless, because it was the last piece from an old collection marked down again and again until no one seemed to want it. But when I tried it on, something happened. The dress was simple, white satin, clean lines, no heavy crystals, no dramatic train, no screaming luxury, just a soft, elegant dress that made me feel like myself. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. For the first time in months, I did not see Helen's judgment. I did not see Mark's silence. I did not see the wedding becoming something that no longer belonged to me. I saw a bride, a woman choosing herself in the smallest way she still could. So I bought it. When I told Mark, he smiled uncertainly. $50? Yes. Are you sure? I love it, he nodded slowly. Then I love it too. I wanted to believe him, but his voice had that careful tone again. the tone of a man already imagining his mother's reaction. And Helen's reaction came 3 days later. She found out through the boutique owner, who called her to ask why I had canceled the appointment for the designer gown. That evening, Helen called me directly. Not Mark, me. I answered while standing in my kitchen washing a coffee cup. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Sarah, I heard you purchased your wedding dress." "Yes, for $50. I dried my hands slowly. "Yes." There was a pause, then she laughed, not loudly, softly, cruelly. "You cannot be serious." "I am." "Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" I stared out the window. "For whom?" Her voice sharpened. "For this family." I closed my eyes. There it was, the truth again. Not humiliating for me, for her, for the image she had built, for the story she wanted to tell. I said, "It is my wedding dress, Helen." "No," she snapped. "It is the dress you will wear while standing next to my son in front of hundreds of people connected to our family." I gripped the edge of the counter. If your family can be humiliated by the price tag of a dress, then maybe your family is not as strong as you think. Silence. For 1 second I thought she had hung up. Then she said, very quietly, "You will regret speaking to me like that." The call ended. I stood there with the phone in my hand. My heart was pounding. But underneath the fear, there was something else. Relief. Because for the first time, I had stopped smiling. I had stopped softening my words. I had stopped making myself smaller so Helen could feel taller. When Mark called later, I knew she had already spoken to him. He sounded exhausted. "Sarah, why did you provoke her?" I laughed once. Coldly. "I provoked her by buying my own wedding dress? You know how she is." "Yes," I said, "I do." "And you still pushed back." That was the moment something inside me began to break. Not loudly, not all at once, just a quiet crack. Because Mark was not upset that his mother had insulted me. He was upset that I had made his life uncomfortable by refusing to accept it. I said, "Do you want me to wear the designer gown?" He hesitated. That hesitation answered before his words did. "I just want the day to go smoothly." Smoothly. Peacefully, without conflict, without embarrassment. Without Mark having to stand between the woman he loved and the woman he feared. I looked at the engagement ring on my finger. For the first time, it did not feel like a promise. It felt like a warning. "Then maybe you should ask your mother to behave smoothly," I said. He sighed. "Please do not do this." "Do what?" "Turn this into a fight." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Mark, your mother has been fighting me since the first day we met. I am only now deciding whether to fight back." He did not answer, and in his silence I heard the future. I heard every dinner where he would ask me to be patient, every insult he would explain away, every moment he would call my pain sensitivity and his fear peace. I should have ended it then. I know that now. But love does not always leave when dignity tells it to. Sometimes love stays one mistake too long, sometimes it waits for the final humiliation. And mine was coming, on our wedding day. The morning of my wedding began quietly. Too quietly. I woke before sunrise, long before my alarm could ring. For a few minutes I just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the city outside my window. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. That was what people always said about weddings, the happiest day, the magical day, the day every little girl dreamed about. But I did not feel magical. I felt heavy, like my heart already knew something my mind was still trying to deny. My wedding dress hung on the closet door, the $50 dress. Simple, white, mine. In the soft morning light, it looked almost innocent, like it had no idea how many people had already judged it. I got out of bed and walked toward it slowly. For a while, I just touched the fabric between my fingers. It was not expensive. I knew that better than anyone, but it was not supposed to prove anything. Not wealth. Not status, not taste, not whether I deserved to be loved. It was just supposed to be the dress I wore while marrying the man I had chosen. I whispered to myself, "Today I will not let her ruin this." But even as I said it, I was not sure I believed it. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a message from Mark. "Good morning, my almost wife. I love you. Today is going to be perfect." I stared at the words. Perfect. That word felt dangerous. Because Mark's version of perfect usually meant quiet. No conflict, no uncomfortable truths, no one challenging his mother. I typed back, "I love you too." Then I deleted it. I typed, "Please stand beside me today." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I deleted that too. Finally, I sent only "see you soon." The makeup artist arrived at 7. Then Emily arrived 20 minutes later with coffee, pastries, and the kind of worried expression only a best friend could wear while pretending to be excited. She stepped into my bedroom, looked at me, then looked at the dress. "You look like you have not slept." "I slept." "No, you closed your eyes. That is different." I smiled faintly. Emily set the coffee down and came closer. "Sarah," I knew that tone. It was the tone she used when she wanted to say something difficult but had already decided she would not soften it too much. "What?" She looked toward the dress again. "Are you sure?" The room went still. The makeup artist quietly pretended to organize her brushes. I knew Emily was not asking about the dress. I sat on the edge of the bed. "I love him. I know. He is not a bad person. I know that too." "Then why are you looking at me like that?" Emily sat beside me. "Because not being bad is not the same as being good for you." I looked down at my hands. The engagement ring caught a thin line of sunlight. For months, that ring had felt like something I needed to protect. Now it felt like something I was trying to explain. Emily lowered her voice. "Sarah, I am not saying this to hurt you. I just need you to ask yourself one thing before you walk down that aisle." "What?" "If Helen humiliates you today, will Mark stop her?" I said nothing. That was the problem. I did not know. Or worse, maybe I did know. Emily touched my arm. "You should not have to hope your husband will defend you. You should know." My throat tightened. "I do not want to talk about this today." "I know." "Then do not." She nodded slowly, but the words stayed in the room. They stayed while the makeup artist applied foundation to my face. They stayed while my hair was curled and pinned into place. They stayed while I stepped into the $50 dress and watched myself become a bride. When the zipper closed, Emily stood behind me looking at my reflection. For the first time that morning, she smiled, a real smile. "You look beautiful." I let out a breath. "Do I look cheap?" Her face changed immediately. "No." I tried to laugh, but it came out broken. Emily turned me gently toward her. "You look like yourself. That is what she cannot stand." Those words nearly made me cry, but I did not want to ruin my makeup, so I swallowed the tears and nodded. By 10 o'clock, the car arrived. Helen had arranged everything. Of course she had. A black luxury car waited outside my apartment building, polished so perfectly that I could see the sky reflected on the door. The driver opened it for me with a respectful nod. Emily helped me gather the dress. As I stepped inside, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was not Mark. It was my father. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" I stared at his message for a long moment. My father had not been involved in the wedding planning. Not because he did not care, because I had asked him not to be. He had offered many times. He had wanted to pay for everything: the venue, the flowers, the dress, the food, even the honeymoon. But I had refused. I told him Mark and I wanted to do things simply. That was partly true. But the bigger truth was this: I did not want Helen to know. Not yet. My father knew about Mark. He had met him twice. He was polite to him, kind even. But after the second meeting, he asked me one question. "Does he make you feel safe when things are difficult?" I remembered getting annoyed. "Dad, why does everyone keep asking me that?" He did not argue. He only looked at me with those tired, wise eyes and said, "Because people who love you are seeing something you do not want to see." I had walked away angry that day. Now, sitting in the back of the wedding car, I understood why his voice had sounded so sad. I typed back, "I am ready." His reply came almost instantly. "I will be there soon. Remember, you are my daughter before you are anyone's wife." I pressed the phone against my chest. For a moment, I wanted to call him. I wanted to tell him everything. About Helen, about the dress, about Mark's silence, about how afraid I was that I was walking into a future where I would have to shrink myself every day just to keep the peace. But the car began to move, and I told myself it was too late. The hotel was already crowded when we arrived. Helen had chosen one of the most luxurious hotels in the city. Not because it meant anything to Mark and me, because it meant something to her. It had marble floors, golden lighting, crystal chandeliers, a grand staircase, and a ballroom large enough to make any family look more powerful than they were. The irony was almost painful. Helen had spent months bragging about securing that venue. She told her friends it showed the level of family Mark came from. She told relatives that not everyone could afford a wedding there. She told one guest, loudly enough for me to hear, that she had rescued the event from becoming embarrassingly simple. What she did not know was that the hotel belonged to my father's company. Not indirectly, not through a partner, not through some distant investment. It was one of his favorite properties. I had spent childhood weekends in that building, eating pancakes in the executive lounge while my father reviewed reports downstairs. The general manager had known me since I was 12. The chef had once made me a birthday cake shaped like a castle. Several of the senior staff still called me Miss Sarah when no one else was listening. But on that morning, I had asked them to treat me like any other bride. No special attention, no private greeting, no signs that I was anything more than the woman in the $50 dress. I wanted the truth to reveal people. And it did. The moment I entered the bridal suite, I saw Helen. She was standing near the mirror, speaking to two women I recognized as her friends. She wore a silver gown that looked more bridal than anything a mother of the groom should have worn. Her hair was styled perfectly. Her diamonds flashed under the lights. When she saw me, her smile disappeared. Her eyes went straight to the dress. For 3 seconds, she said nothing. Then she laughed, a small, sharp laugh. "Oh, Sarah!" Emily moved closer to me. Helen walked around me slowly, looking at the dress from every angle, not like a woman admiring a bride, like a buyer inspecting damaged goods. "You actually wore it?" I lifted my chin. "Yes." Her friends exchanged glances. One of them pressed her lips together, trying not to smile. Helen touched the edge of the fabric with 2 fingers, then let it drop as if it had dirtied her hand. "I thought perhaps you were only saying that to upset me. It is my wedding dress." "No," she said coldly. "It is a statement." "Yes," I said. "Maybe it is." Her eyes narrowed. For a moment I saw anger flicker through her perfect mask. Then she smiled. That smile worried me more than anger. "Very well. If this is how you want to present yourself, that is your choice." Emily stepped in. "She looks beautiful." Helen turned to her slowly. "How loyal of you." Emily's face hardened. I touched her arm gently. "Not today, not yet." Helen looked back at me. "The photographer is waiting. Try to stand in the back for the family photos until we figure out the best angle." I stared at her. "The back?" She smiled sweetly. "The dress is very distracting." Emily said, "Are you serious?" Helen ignored her. I looked toward the door, hoping Mark would appear. He did. A few seconds later, he stepped into the suite. He looked handsome in his black suit. Nervous, pale. His eyes found me immediately. For one brief moment, his expression softened. "You look beautiful," he said. I wanted those words to be enough, but Helen spoke before I could answer. "Mark, please tell me you are not actually comfortable with this." His face changed. Not much, but enough. He glanced at the dress, then at his mother, then at me. The room became painfully quiet. This was the moment. A small moment. Private. Easy. He could have taken my hand. He could have said, "Mother, stop." He could have told her I was his bride, and that was enough. Instead, he said, "Mom, not now. Not stop. Not you are wrong. Not do not speak to her like that. Just not now." Helen heard the difference. So did I. She gave me a satisfied look, then turned away as if the matter had already been settled. Mark stepped closer to me. "Sarah, you know I think you look beautiful." I looked at him. Then why did that sound like an apology? He opened his mouth, closed it. The wedding planner knocked before he could answer. "It is time. Time." Everyone loved that word. Time to walk, time to smile, time to pretend, time to stand in front of hundreds of people and make a promise I was no longer sure either of us understood. Emily squeezed my hand. "You do not have to do this," she whispered. I looked at her, then at Mark, then at the hallway leading to the ballroom. For a moment, everything inside me screamed to leave, to walk out, to call my father, to take off the ring and return to the quiet life I had nearly lost, trying to prove love did not need status. But then I heard Helen laughing softly behind me. Not loudly, not enough for everyone to notice, just enough for me. It was the laugh of a woman who believed she had broken me before the ceremony even began. And something in me changed. I was not ready to leave. Not yet. Because if I walked away quietly, Helen would tell the story for the rest of her life. She would tell everyone that the poor girl lost her nerve, that I realized I did not belong, that I ran because I was ashamed. No. If this wedding was going to end, it would end with the truth, not Helen's version. Mine. So I straightened my shoulders, I picked up my bouquet, and I walked toward the ballroom. The doors opened. Hundreds of faces turned toward me. The music began. The aisle stretched ahead, lined with white flowers I had not chosen. At the end stood Mark. Beside him stood Helen, smiling, waiting, watching. She thought this was her stage. She thought I was walking into her victory, but with every step I took, I felt the fear inside me becoming colder, cleaner, stronger, because Helen had forgotten something. When you spend too long humiliating someone in silence, you start to believe silence is all they have. But silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the last kindness you give people before you let them destroy themselves. And Helen was about to do exactly that. The walk down the aisle felt longer than it should have. Every step echoed softly against the marble floor. Every face seemed to turn toward me in slow motion. Some guests smiled politely, some whispered. Some looked at my dress, then at each other, trying to hide their judgment behind practiced expressions. I knew what they saw. A simple white dress, no designer label, no dramatic train, no expensive lace, no glittering detail that announced money before the bride even spoke. And because they believed what Helen believed, they saw less than a bride. They saw a poor girl trying to enter a rich family. I kept walking. My bouquet trembled slightly in my hands, but I did not lower my head. At the end of the aisle, Mark watched me. For one moment, his expression softened again. There was love there. I still believe that. But love without courage is a fragile thing. It shines beautifully in private, then disappears the moment the room becomes too loud. When I reached him, he took my hand. His fingers were cold. "You look beautiful," he whispered. I wanted to believe him. I wanted those words to erase everything that had happened that morning. But before I could answer, I saw Helen standing behind him, smiling. Not warmly, not proudly, triumphantly. The ceremony began. The officiant welcomed everyone. He spoke about love, commitment, family, respect. Every word felt strange in that room. Respect. I almost looked at Helen when he said it. But I kept my eyes on Mark. He looked nervous. His thumb moved over the back of my hand again and again, like he was trying to calm himself more than me. The first part of the ceremony passed quietly. Too quietly. And for a few dangerous minutes, I thought maybe Helen had decided not to cause a scene. Maybe she had insulted me enough in private. Maybe she would let the ceremony finish. Maybe I had imagined the worst. Then the officiant asked if anyone wished to speak before we exchanged vows. It was supposed to be a symbolic moment, a traditional line no one took seriously anymore, the kind of sentence that passed in weddings without consequence. But Helen stepped forward. The room shifted. A small wave of confusion moved through the guests. Mark's hand tightened around mine. "Mom," he said under his breath. Helen ignored him. She walked with perfect posture, her silver dress catching the light with every step. The officiant looked uncertain. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Helen smiled. "I apologize. I know this is unusual." Her voice was calm, elegant, controlled, the voice of a woman who had planned every word. "But before my son makes the most important decision of his life, I believe a mother has the right to speak." The guests became silent. My heart began to pound. Mark whispered, "Mom, do not." It was the weakest warning I had ever heard. Helen turned slightly toward him. "This will only take a moment." Then she faced the room. "I have always taught my son that marriage is not simply about emotion. It is about values, family, character, the ability to stand with dignity in the world one is entering." Her eyes moved to me. I felt Emily stiffen somewhere behind me. Helen continued. "When Mark first introduced Sarah to me, I tried to be open-minded. I truly did. A lie, delivered beautifully. I told myself that background does not matter, that money does not matter, that perhaps love could bridge certain differences." Several guests glanced at me, some with pity, some with curiosity, some with the quiet excitement people feel when they realize a private scandal has become public entertainment. Helen took another step forward, but over time I became concerned. Mark finally stepped beside her. "Mom, stop." She looked at him with wounded eyes. "Mark, I am trying to protect you." There it was again. Protection. The word she used whenever she wanted permission to destroy something. She turned back to the guests. I became concerned that my son was being pulled into a marriage without understanding the full reality of what it would mean. My throat felt dry. I wanted to speak, but something inside me stayed still. "Watch," it said. "Let her show herself." Helen lifted one hand gently toward me. Sarah is a sweet girl. That word again, sweet, small, harmless, almost nothing. But sweetness is not enough to build a life. Marriage requires compatibility. It requires a shared world, a shared standard. Then her gaze dropped to my dress. The room followed. Every eye moved down, to the simple white satin, to the clean lines, to the dress she had hated from the moment she heard its price. Helen's voice softened, and somehow that made it crueler. When a woman chooses to stand before hundreds of guests beside a man from a respected family, wearing a dress that costs less than dinner for two, it says something. A gasp moved through the room. Mark went pale. I felt the blood leave my face. Helen did not stop. She had waited too long for this. She had sharpened this moment in her mind until it became a weapon. It says she does not understand the family she is entering. Her smile trembled with fake sadness. It says she does not respect the occasion. A guest whispered, "How much did she say?" Another answered, $50. The number moved through the room like smoke. $50, $50, $50. I heard it from different corners. Quiet voices, judging voices, hungry voices. Helen lifted her chin, and perhaps most importantly, it says she does not respect my son. That was when something inside me went cold. Not broken, cold. Because Helen could insult me. She could mock my dress. She could look down on my background. She could pretend my silence was shame. But she would not stand in front of that room and turn my dignity into disrespect. Mark looked at me. His eyes were full of panic. Not anger, panic. Because the scene had become public. Because people were watching. Because now he had to decide who he was in front of everyone. I waited. One last time. I gave him one final chance. Say something. Defend me. Choose me. Mark swallowed. "Mom," he said quietly, "this is not the time." Not the time. Those 3 words ended everything. Not because they were cruel, because they were cowardly. Even then, even in front of hundreds of people, even while his mother publicly humiliated the woman he was about to marry, Mark still treated the problem as timing. Not cruelty, not disrespect, not betrayal. Timing. Helen looked satisfied. She turned toward me. "Sarah, I do not hate you. I simply believe you need to understand that marrying into a family like ours comes with expectations." I looked at her, really looked at her, at the perfect hair, the expensive diamonds, the silver dress she had worn to outshine a bride, the calm face of a woman who believed money gave her the right to measure human worth. For 2 years, I had lowered my voice around her. I had smiled through insults. I had swallowed anger until it felt normal. I had let Mark convince me that patience was love. But standing there in my stained heart and my $50 dress, I finally felt the patience leave my body. I released Mark's hand. The movement was small, but everyone saw it. Mark turned toward me. "Sarah." I did not look at him. I looked at Helen. Then I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I finally understood the truth. Helen had not exposed me. She had exposed herself, and Mark had helped her do it. I handed my bouquet to Emily. Then I stepped forward. The room was so quiet I could hear the soft buzz of the lights above us. Helen's smile faded slightly. Perhaps she expected tears. Perhaps she expected me to run. Perhaps she expected me to beg her not to ruin my wedding. Instead, I asked, "Are you finished?" The question was calm. Too calm. Helen blinked. "I beg your pardon. I asked if you were finished." A few guests shifted in their seats. Mark whispered, "Please, eat." I finally looked at him. "Please what?" He looked devastated, but still not brave. "Do not make this worse," he said. I almost laughed. Not loudly, just enough for him to understand what he had become to me in that moment. "I am not making this worse, Mark. I am only refusing to keep pretending it is fine." His face crumpled. Helen stepped in quickly. "See, this is exactly what I mean. This emotional behavior." I turned back to her. "No." The word cut through the room. Helen stopped. I took one more step toward her. "You do not get to humiliate me and then call my response emotional." Her eyes narrowed. I continued. "You do not get to insult my dress, my family, my background, and my worth, then pretend you are protecting your son." The guests were completely silent now. No whispers, no movement. Even the officiant had stepped back. Helen's face hardened. "I am speaking the truth." "No," I said. "You are speaking from arrogance. There is a difference." A few people gasped. Mark reached for my arm. I moved away before he could touch me. That hurt him. I saw it, but not enough to stop. Helen's voice dropped. "Be very careful, Sarah." There it was, the threat, the same tone she had used on the phone, the same tone she used when she believed people should remember their place. But for the first time, I did not feel small. I have been careful for 2 years, I said. Careful with my words, careful with my clothes, careful with your feelings, careful with Mark's fear of disappointing you. Mark flinched. I did not stop. I have been so careful that I nearly forgot I had the right to be respected. Helen laughed sharply. Respected? Respect is earned. Yes, I said, and today you lost mine. Her face changed. For one moment, the mask slipped. Anger showed through. Real anger, not polished, not elegant, ugly. How dare you speak to me this way in front of my guests? Your guests? I repeated. Then I looked around the ballroom. The crystal chandeliers, the white flowers, the gold chairs, the waiters standing frozen near the walls, the grand staircase visible through the open doors. A strange calm settled over me. Helen did not know where she was standing. Not really. She thought she had chosen a stage. She did not understand it was also my home. I turned back to her. That is the problem, Helen. You keep talking about ownership as if everything here belongs to you. Helen scoffed. What are you talking about? Before I could answer, the ballroom doors opened. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for every head to turn. My father walked in. He wore a dark suit, simple, perfectly tailored. No flashy watch, no unnecessary display. He did not need to announce power. He carried it quietly. Beside him walked the hotel's general manager, Mr. Alvarez. Behind them were 2 senior staff members I had known for years. Helen looked annoyed at first, then confused, then slightly uneasy. The general manager approached my father with visible respect. Mr. Bennett, everything is ready as you requested. The room changed. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A ripple of recognition passed through several guests. Someone whispered my father's name. Then someone else repeated it. Helen's face lost color. Mark looked from my father to me. His mouth opened slightly. My father did not look at Helen first. He looked at me. His eyes moved over my face, my dress, my shaking hands, and somehow that almost broke me more than the humiliation had. Because his expression was not angry. It was sad. Sad that I had endured this. Sad that I had tried to prove my worth to people who never deserved access to me. He walked down the aisle slowly and stopped beside me. Then, in front of everyone, he took off his suit jacket and placed it gently around my shoulders. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" he asked, one word. And suddenly I was not the poor girl in the $50 dress. I was his daughter. I swallowed hard. I am now. Helen stared at us. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. My father turned to her. His voice was calm, dangerously calm. "Mrs. Whitmore," Helen straightened, trying to recover. "Mr. Bennett, I did not realize—" "No," my father said, "you did not." The room froze again. Helen's hands trembled around her clutch. My father looked around the ballroom, then back at her. "You did not realize whose daughter you were humiliating." Helen opened her mouth. He continued, "You did not realize who owns this hotel." A louder wave of whispers moved through the guests. My father's voice remained steady. "You did not realize whose company has been reviewing your family's real estate proposal for the past 6 months." Mark's face went completely white. Helen looked as if the floor had disappeared beneath her. "And most importantly," my father said, "you did not realize that none of those things should have mattered." That sentence silenced the room more completely than anything else. My father stepped slightly in front of me. "You thought my daughter was worthless when you believed she had no money. That tells me everything I need to know about you." Helen finally found her voice. "Mr. Bennett, please, this is a misunderstanding." My father looked at her with quiet disgust. "No, a misunderstanding is when someone lacks information. What you lacked was character." The words landed harder than any shout could have. Helen's face turned. Mark stepped forward. "Sir, I did not know." My father turned to him. "You did not know what? That Sarah had money?" Mark froze. My father's voice sharpened for the first time. "Is that the part you are sorry about?" Mark looked at me. "Sarah, please, I can explain." I looked at him, and for the first time that day I felt nothing. Not love, not anger, not grief, just clarity. "You already did," I said. His eyes filled with panic. "I never wanted this to happen." "But you allowed it to happen." He shook his head. "I was trying to keep peace." "No," I said, "you were trying to stay comfortable." Mark had no answer, because the truth does not always need volume. Sometimes it only needs to be said once. Helen stepped toward my father. Mr. Bennet, I am sure we can discuss this privately. My father did not move. There is nothing private about what you did. She looked around, suddenly aware of the eyes watching her, the same eyes she had hoped would watch me break. Now they watched her unravel. My father turned to Mr. Alvarez. Please cancel the ceremony. A gasp moved through the room. Mark turned to me. Sarah. I removed the engagement ring from my finger. For a second I held it in my palm. It looked smaller than I remembered, less like a promise now, more like evidence. Then I placed it gently on the altar table. I cannot marry a man who needs an audience to maybe consider defending me. Mark's face twisted. I love you, I nodded. Maybe you do, but not enough to be brave. That was the last thing I said to him as his fiancée. Then I turned away. Emily came to my side immediately. My father kept his jacket around my shoulders and offered me his arm. Together we began walking back down the aisle. This time I was not walking toward a man. I was walking away from one. Behind me, Helen called out, Sarah, wait! I did not stop. Her voice cracked. Please, we can fix this. I paused then, not because I was considering it, because I wanted her to hear me clearly. I turned just enough to look at her. You were right about one thing, Helen. She stared at me, desperate. Marriage is about family, reputation, character, and values. Then I looked at Mark, and today your family showed me all of them. No one spoke. Not Helen, not Mark, not a single guest. I turned back around, and this time when I walked out of the ballroom, I did not feel ashamed of my $50 dress. I felt grateful for it, because it had shown me exactly who everyone was. The moment we stepped out of the ballroom, the noise behind us changed. At first, there had been silence, heavy, shocked, unbelieving silence. Then came the whispers, soft at first, then louder, voices rising behind the closed doors like a storm beginning to form. I did not turn back, not once. My father kept his arm steady under my hand as we walked through the grand hallway. Emily followed close behind, carrying the bouquet I had handed her at the altar. The hotel staff stood along the corridor, frozen between professionalism and concern. Some lowered their eyes respectfully. Some looked at me with quiet sympathy. A few had known me since I was young. I could feel their shock. Not because they had learned who I was. They already knew. They were shocked because they had just watched strangers treat me like I was nothing inside a place that had once felt like home. When we reached the private lounge near the back of the hotel, my father opened the door and guided me inside. The room was quiet, warm, away from the chandeliers, the guests, the whispers, and the woman who had tried to turn my wedding into a public execution. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Emily put the bouquet down on the table and burst into tears. I stared at her, surprised. She covered her mouth with both hands. I am sorry, she whispered. I am so sorry, Sarah. That broke something in me. Not Helen's insults, not Mark's silence, not the hundreds of people staring at my dress, Emily's tears. Because until that moment, I had been holding myself together with anger. Anger had kept my voice steady. Anger had carried me down the aisle. Anger had helped me remove the ring without collapsing. But now, inside that quiet room, anger began to fade, and pain rushed in behind it. My knees weakened. My father caught me before I fell. He wrapped both arms around me, careful not to crush the dress, and held me the way he used to when I was a child waking from a nightmare. Only this time the nightmare had happened in front of everyone. I should have told you, I whispered. His hand moved gently over my hair. No. I should have told you what she was doing. You told me enough without words. I closed my eyes. Tears finally came. Hot, silent, humiliating in a different way. Because I had promised myself I would not cry over Mark. Not after what he had allowed. Not after what his mother had done. But grief does not care what promises pride makes. I cried for the woman I had been that morning. The woman who had still hoped Mark would choose her. I cried for the 2 years I had spent translating cruelty into misunderstanding. I cried for every dinner where I had smiled through an insult. Every phone call where I had accepted an apology without change. Every moment I had mistaken endurance for love. My father let me cry. He did not tell me to be strong. He did not tell me not to waste tears. He did not tell me revenge would make me feel better. He only held me and said, "You are safe now." Those words hurt more than I expected, because part of me knew he was right, and another part of me hated that I had not been safe before. A few minutes later, There was a knock at the door. Mr. Alvarez stepped inside carefully. "I am sorry to interrupt, Mr. Bennett." My father released me slowly but kept one hand on my shoulder. "What is it?" Mr. Alvarez looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Whitmore is demanding to speak with you." Emily wiped her eyes and let out a sharp laugh. "Of course she is." My father's face did not change. "Is Mark with her?" "Yes, sir. And several guests are refusing to leave the ballroom until they understand what is happening." I let out a tired breath. Of course, Helen had created a public scene. Now she wanted a private escape. My father looked at me. "You do not have to see them." I knew he meant it. If I asked, he would have security escort them out. He would cancel every contract connected to the Whitmore family. He would make sure Helen never entered one of his hotels again. He had the power to do all of it, but that was exactly why I had spent years hiding who I was. I did not want power to speak for me. I wanted truth to. "I will see them," I said. Emily turned toward me. "Sarah." "I am not going back into that ballroom," I said, "but I will see them here." My father studied my face. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "I want this to end cleanly." He understood. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Helen entered first, but she did not look like the woman who had stood at the altar. Her face was pale, her silver dress still glittered, but now it looked desperate instead of elegant. Her perfect hair had loosened slightly near one ear. Her lips were pressed together so tightly they had almost disappeared. Behind her came Mark. He looked destroyed. His black suit was still perfect, but everything else about him had fallen apart. His eyes were red. His face was ashen. His hands shook at his sides. For the first time since I had known them, both of them looked smaller than the room they were standing in. Helen's eyes went first to my father, then to me, then to the jacket still around my shoulders. She swallowed. "Sarah." My name sounded strange in her mouth now, almost respectful, almost afraid. I did not answer. Helen took one step forward. I believe emotions were running high in the ballroom. Emily's face twisted with disgust. My father raised one hand slightly, stopping her from speaking. Helen continued, carefully choosing each word. "What happened was unfortunate." "Unfortunate, not cruel, not shameful, not wrong. Unfortunate." I looked at her calmly. "Unfortunate is when it rains on a wedding day, Helen. What you did was intentional." Her face tightened. "I was concerned for my son." "No," I said. "You were embarrassed by me." She opened her mouth. I did not let her speak. "You were embarrassed by my dress, my supposed background, my lack of status, my dead mother, my father when you thought he was ordinary, my job when you thought it meant serving people instead of owning the company that employs them." Helen flinched. Mark looked down. I kept going. "For 2 years you measured me by everything except who I was." Helen's eyes shone, but I did not know whether it was shame or fear, maybe both. "I made mistakes," she said. "No," my father said quietly. "You made choices." Helen looked at him. Her voice softened immediately. "Mr. Bennett, please understand. Had I known—" "That is exactly the problem," he said. The room went silent. My father stepped forward. "You are not sorry because you humiliated my daughter. You are sorry because you found out she was not powerless." Helen's face went red. "That is not fair. Neither was what you did to her." Mark finally moved. He stepped toward me. "Sarah, please, can we talk alone?" I looked at him. For 2 years I had wanted him to ask for that, a real conversation. Not excuses, not apologies forced by consequences, but the chance had passed. "There is nothing you can say alone that you were not brave enough to say in public," I replied. His eyes filled with tears. I froze. "Yes, I was shocked." "No," I said, "you were familiar." He looked confused. I explained. "You did what you have always done. You looked uncomfortable, waited for it to pass, and hoped I would make myself smaller so you would not have to become stronger." Mark shook his head. "I love you. Love did not stop you from letting her hurt me." "I wanted to. You just what?" He had no answer. Because every honest answer was ugly. I was afraid of my mother. "I wanted you to tolerate it. I chose peace over your dignity. I hoped you would forgive me again." Mark covered his face with one hand. "I can change." Those words should have moved me. A few months earlier, they might have. A year earlier, I would have held on to them like proof that our relationship could survive. But now they sounded late. Too late. Change offered only after public exposure is not courage. It is damage control. I removed my father's jacket from my shoulders and laid it gently over the back of a chair. Then I faced Mark fully. I wanted you to change before it cost you something. His mouth trembled. I did not know it would cost me you. That is the problem, I said softly. You should have known I was worth protecting before you knew I was worth losing. He cried then, silently, painfully, and for a moment the part of me that had loved him wanted to reach for him. Habit is cruel that way. Even after someone fails you, your heart remembers the days they were gentle. It remembers coffee in the rain, morning messages, soft laughter, hands held on quiet sidewalks. But memory is not enough to build a marriage, not when the present has shown you the truth. Helen suddenly stepped forward. Sarah, please, I handled this badly, Emily muttered. That is one way to say it. Helen ignored her. I should not have spoken publicly. I see that now. I smiled faintly. You still think the problem was the audience? Helen stopped. I continued. You do not regret what you believed. You regret where you said it. Her lips parted. No words came. My father looked at Mr. Alvarez. Please prepare the cancellation documents for the event charges under the Whitmore account. Helen's face changed immediately. Charges? Mr. Alvarez's expression remained professional. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore, the event contract was signed under your name. Helen looked at my father, panic rising. But this is your hotel. It is, my father said, and you invited our family here. No, he said. My daughter agreed to marry your son here. You signed the event agreement because you insisted on controlling the wedding. Helen went still. The meaning settled over her slowly. The venue, the flowers, the catering, the private staff, the ballroom, all the luxury she had chosen to prove her superiority. All of it now belonged to a wedding that had been canceled because of her own cruelty. And the bill was hers. Mark looked stunned. Sir, please, we can pay. Just give us time. My father's eyes moved to him. This is not about money. Helen looked relieved for half a second. Then my father added, but responsibility often has a price people understand better than shame. Helen's relief vanished. Mr. Alvarez cleared his throat. There is also the matter of the pending real estate proposal. Helen's face went completely blank. My father turned to me. He did not make the decision for me. He only looked at me. That mattered. Even now, he did not use my pain as an excuse to take control. He gave me the choice. I took a slow breath. The proposal. I knew about it. Mark's family had been trying to partner with my father's company on a major hotel redevelopment project, a project that would have lifted them into a much higher circle. Helen had mentioned it for months without knowing who was behind the final approval. She bragged about it at dinners. She told friends their family was expanding into elite hospitality. She treated the possible deal like proof that the Whitmores were rising. Now she understood. The person she had humiliated in a $50 dress was the daughter of the man whose signature they needed. Helen clasped her hands together. Sarah, please, whatever happened between us should not affect business. I looked at her for a long time. There it was, the real fear. Not losing me, not hurting Mark, not destroying a wedding, business, status, access. The world she worshipped was beginning to close its doors, and suddenly she wanted fairness. I said, you are right. Business should not be affected by personal emotion. Helen breathed out. Then I continued, but character is not personal emotion. It is risk assessment. Her face tightened. I looked at my father. I would not recommend partnering with a family that treats people well only when they think they are useful. My father nodded once. Mr. Alvarez understood immediately. I will inform the board that the proposal is no longer under consideration. Helen staggered slightly, as if someone had pushed her. Mark caught her arm. Mom, she pulled away from him. For the first time, she looked at him not as a son, but as a failed investment. You said she was ordinary, Helen whispered. The room froze. Mark's face twisted. I stared at her, even now. Even now, her anger was not that she had hurt me, it was that she had miscalculated. Mark looked ashamed. I did not know. Helen's eyes flashed. That is the point. That sentence revealed more about their family than any insult ever could. To Helen, kindness was strategy. Marriage was status. People were doors. And I had been dismissed because I appeared to open none. I picked up my bouquet from the table. The flowers were still beautiful. White roses, pale green leaves, a ribbon I had not chosen. I held it for a moment, then placed it in Helen's hands. She stared at it, confused. You wanted the wedding more than I did, I said. You can keep what is left of it. Her face crumpled, not fully. Helen was too proud for that, but enough. I turned to Mark. This is goodbye. He stepped forward. Sarah, please, do not decide everything today. We can take time. Time. Again. The word followed us like a curse. I shook my head. You had 2 years. He stopped. I looked at him one final time. The wedding did not end today because your mother hated me. It ended because you let her. He closed his eyes. I walked past him. This time he did not reach for me. Maybe he knew I would not stop. Maybe for once he understood that silence had consequences. My father opened the door. Emily walked out first. Then I followed. As the door closed behind me, I heard Helen begin to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a broken, angry sound from a woman watching the life she had tried to control slip through her fingers. I should have felt satisfaction. Maybe part of me did. But mostly I felt tired. Because losing people, even people who failed you, is still a kind of grief. Outside the hotel, the sky had turned gray. Rain had begun to fall. Soft at first, then harder. The same kind of rain that had fallen the day I met Mark. For a strange second, I almost laughed. The story had begun with rain. Now it ended with it too. Only this time I was not making room at my table for a stranger. I was walking away from one. For the next 3 days, I did not answer Mark's calls. Not the first one, not the 10th, not the 37th. At first, his messages were desperate. Sarah, please pick up. I need to explain. I know I failed you. Please do not let one terrible day erase everything we had. Then they became longer. I was afraid, I admit it. I should have stood up to her years ago. I should have protected you. I see that now. Then shorter. I miss you. I am sorry. I love you. Then finally, silent. That silence hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted him to keep chasing me, but because silence had always been Mark's language. Even now, after everything, it was the only thing he knew how to do when the truth became too heavy. I stayed at my father's house during those 3 days. He did not force me to talk. He did not ask me to make decisions before I was ready. He simply made sure there was food in the kitchen, tea on the table, and someone nearby whenever the grief became too quiet. On the second night, I found him sitting alone in his study. The room smelled of old books, leather, and the faint coffee he always drank too late. He was holding a framed photograph of my mother. In the picture, she was laughing, her head tilted back, her hand resting on my father's arm. She looked young, alive, untouchable. I stood in the doorway for a while before speaking. Do you think she would be disappointed in me? My father looked up. His expression softened immediately. Your mother? I nodded. For almost marrying him. He placed the photograph carefully on the desk. No. I walked into the room and sat across from him. She would have seen through Helen on the first day. He smiled faintly. Yes, she probably would have. That makes it worse. No, sweetheart, it makes you human. I looked down at my hands. The place where the ring had been felt strangely bare. I feel stupid. You are not stupid. I ignored everyone. You wanted to believe someone you loved would become better. That sounds stupid. That sounds hopeful. I looked at him. His voice was calm, but his eyes were tired. Hope is not weakness, Sarah, but it becomes dangerous when you use it to excuse patterns. Patterns. That word sat between us. Because that was what Mark had been. Not one failure, not one mistake, a pattern, 1,000 small moments where he chose comfort over courage. 1,000 small silences that had led to one public betrayal. My father leaned back in his chair. Do you know why I did not tell you to leave him? I shook my head. Because if I had, you might have stayed longer just to prove I was wrong. A sad laugh escaped me. He was right. Of course he was right. I wanted you to see it, he said. Not because I wanted you hurt, because I wanted the decision to belong to you. I swallowed hard. It hurts. I know. I still miss the version of him I thought he was. My father nodded. That is often the hardest part. You do not only grieve the person, you grieve the future you built around them. That sentence broke me again, quietly this time. No sobbing, no collapse, just tears sliding down my face as I realized I was not only mourning Mark, I was mourning the coffee shop. The rain, the morning texts, the idea of a simple life, the woman I had become trying to protect a love that had never protected me back. On the 4th day, Emily came over with takeout, and no patience. She walked into my room, opened the curtains, and said, You are allowed to be sad, but you are not allowed to become furniture. I was lying on the bed in sweatpants. I hate you. No, you love me. Sit up. I do not want food. That is fine. I bought enough for both of us, and I am prepared to eat dramatically in front of you until your survival instincts return. Despite myself, I smiled. She saw it and pointed at me. There, that. We are keeping that. I sat up slowly. Emily placed containers on the bed between us. For a while, we ate in silence. Then she said, "People are talking." I froze. About the wedding. She gave me a look. Sarah, a billionaire's daughter, got humiliated at her own wedding by a woman who thought she was poor. Of course people are talking. I covered my face with one hand. Great. It is not as bad as you think. I looked at her. That is impossible. No, really, most people are on your side. I laughed weakly. There are sides now? There were sides the moment Helen opened her mouth at the altar. Emily took out her phone but did not show it to me. Some guests posted about it without naming you. Then other guests commented. Then someone leaked that the Whitmore proposal was pulled. My stomach tightened. Is my father being dragged into this? A little. But mostly people are questioning why Helen thought it was acceptable to talk about a bride's dress like that in front of everyone. I looked away. I did not want this to become gossip. I know. I just wanted it to end. Emily's voice softened. Sometimes when people humiliate you publicly, the truth has to become public too. I did not answer. I was not sure whether I believed that, but part of me understood it. Helen had wanted an audience. She had wanted witnesses. She had wanted people to remember me as the poor girl who was put in her place. Now the same audience remembered her as the woman who exposed her own character. By the end of the week, the consequences had begun. The Whitmore family's real estate proposal was officially rejected. Not because my father wanted revenge, at least not only because of what happened. The board reviewed the file and discovered what Helen's family had been trying to hide behind polished presentations and expensive dinners. Unstable financing, overstated assets, a pattern of delayed payments to smaller contractors, a lawsuit that had been quietly settled the year before. My father told me none of this with satisfaction. He simply handed me the report and said, "This is why character matters in business too." I read it slowly, page by page, and with every page I understood something new. Helen's obsession with appearances had not come from strength. It came from fear. Her family was not as secure as she pretended. Their wealth was real but fragile. Their reputation looked solid from the outside, but underneath it was full of cracks. And the hotel project had been their chance to climb higher before anyone noticed the foundation was weakening. She had not only wanted Mark to marry well, she had needed him to. A daughter-in-law from a powerful family would have been useful. A daughter-in-law she believed was poor had been a threat. Not because I would take anything from them, because I reminded Helen of what she was terrified of becoming: ordinary. The irony was almost cruel. If Helen had treated me with basic respect, she would have gained the connection she had spent years chasing. Not because I would have let her use me, but because my father was not a man who punished people for lacking status. He punished people for lacking integrity. A week after the wedding, Helen came to my father's office. She did not have an appointment. The receptionist called upstairs and asked whether we wanted security to remove her. My father looked at me. Again, he gave me the choice. I said, "Let her wait." So she waited for 2 hours in the lobby. Not because I wanted to be cruel, because for once, Helen had to sit in a room where her name did not open every door. When we finally let her in, she looked different. No silver gown, no diamonds, no perfect social smile. She wore a dark navy dress and held a small handbag tightly in both hands. Mark was not with her. That surprised me. She stepped into the office and looked around. The view from my father's floor stretched across the city. Hotels, restaurants, office towers, properties she had bragged about wanting access to. Now they surrounded her like silent witnesses. My father sat behind his desk. I sat beside him. Helen looked at me first, then at him. "Thank you for seeing me." Neither of us replied. She took a careful breath. "I came to apologize." I watched her. I had imagined this moment many times. Helen humbled, Helen ashamed, Helen finally forced to admit what she had done. But now that she was standing in front of me, I did not feel the satisfaction I expected. I felt tired. Helen continued. "What happened at the wedding was unacceptable." I said nothing. I spoke out of fear and pride and ignorance. My father's expression did not change. "I judged you unfairly," she said, looking at me. "And I am sorry." The words were almost right, almost, but there was something missing. I had learned to listen not only to what Helen said, but to what she avoided. "What are you sorry for?" I asked. She blinked. I just said, "No, say it clearly." Her fingers tightened around her handbag. "I am sorry I embarrassed you." I shook my head. "That is not enough." Her face flushed. "I am sorry I humiliated you." "Why did you humiliate me?" She looked down. For several seconds she did not speak. Then quietly she said, "Because I thought you were beneath us." There it was, the truth, ugly, small, finally naked. I felt my father shift slightly beside me, but he did not interrupt. Helen lifted her eyes. "And I was wrong." I looked at her for a long time. "Yes," I said, "you were." Her eyes watered. "I have lost almost everything because of that mistake." "No," I said, "you lost almost everything because of who you were before that mistake." She flinched, but she did not argue. That surprised me. Maybe she had no strength left, or maybe losing status had finally made truth louder than pride. She turned to my father. "Mr. Bennett, I know the business proposal is no longer possible, but I am asking you not to cut ties with every company connected to us. There are employees who will suffer." For the first time, I heard something in her voice that sounded almost human. Not polished, not strategic, afraid. My father leaned forward. "Our decision regarding the proposal is final, but we do not punish employees for leadership's arrogance. Existing contracts will be reviewed fairly." Helen's shoulders lowered with relief. "Thank you." Then she looked at me again. "Sarah, I know you have no reason to forgive me." "You are right." Her face tightened, but she nodded. "I know." I stood. The meeting was over, but before she left, I said, "Helen." She stopped. "For 2 years, I wanted you to see my worth." Her eyes filled again. "But that was my mistake. My worth was never something you had the authority to approve." She lowered her gaze. "I understand." I was not sure she did, not fully. But for once, whether she understood no longer mattered. After Helen left, my father looked at me. "Are you all right?" I walked to the window and looked out at the city. For the first time in days, my chest felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but lighter. "I think so." A few days later, Mark came alone. Unlike his mother, he made an appointment. That almost made me smile. The old Mark would have avoided the discomfort until someone else handled it. Maybe losing everything had taught him at least one thing. When he entered the office, he looked tired, thinner, older somehow. He was not wearing a suit, just a dark sweater and jeans. The simplicity hurt, because it reminded me of the man in the coffee shop, the man I had loved before fear hollowed him out. He stood near the door. "Hi. Hi." For a moment we were strangers again, not because we did not know each other, because we knew too much. He looked around the office, then back at me. "I never asked you about this part of your life." "No." I thought I was being respectful. "Maybe part of you was," he nodded slowly, "and maybe another part of me liked believing you were simple, easier, separate from all this." I appreciated the honesty. Even though it hurt, he swallowed. "My mother came to see you." "Yes," she told me. I waited. Mark looked down. "She blamed me afterward." I almost laughed. "I am sure she did. She said I should have known who you were." "And what did you say?" He looked at me then. "I said I should have known how to love you without needing to know." For a moment, the room became very quiet. That sentence reached something in me. Not enough to change my decision, but enough to hurt. He stepped closer, stopping several feet away. "I am not here to ask you to take me back." I studied his face. "You are not?" He shook his head. "I want to, more than anything, but I think asking would just be another way of making you carry my regret." That was the strongest thing I had ever heard him say, and maybe the saddest. He took a breath. "I am here to say I am sorry, not because I lost the wedding, not because my family lost the deal, not because everyone knows. I am sorry because I watched you disappear beside me for 2 years, and I kept calling it peace." My throat tightened. Mark's eyes filled with tears. "You were never hard to love, Sarah. I was just too weak to love you properly." I looked away. For a second, I hated him for saying it so clearly now. After the damage, after the aisle, after the ring, after the dress. But part of me was grateful too, because there was no excuse left. Only truth. He reached into his pocket and took out a small box, my engagement ring. "I do not expect you to wear it again." He placed it gently on the desk. "I just did not want it to stay on that altar." I looked at the box. then at him. "Thank you," he nodded. "I hope one day you can forgive me. I hope one day you become someone you do not need to apologize for." His face broke slightly, then he smiled through it, a sad, honest smile. "I hope so too." He turned toward the door. Before he left, he looked back once. The dress was beautiful. I froze. He swallowed. "I should have said that louder." Then he walked out, and this time his silence did not feel like avoidance. It felt like goodbye. 3 months passed before I wore the dress again. Not for a wedding, not for a man, not for anyone who needed proof that I was worthy of standing beside them. I wore it alone. On a quiet Sunday morning, I took the $50 dress out of its garment bag and laid it across my bed. The red wine stain was still there, faded now, but visible. A dark shadow across the white fabric. For a long time, I only stared at it. I had thought the stain would make me angry. I had thought it would remind me of Helen's voice, of the guests whispering, of Mark lowering his eyes, of standing at the altar and realizing the person I loved had never truly learned how to stand beside me. But strangely, the dress no longer felt ruined. It felt honest. That stain was the moment the truth became impossible to hide. It was the moment Helen's mask slipped, the moment Mark's silence finally spoke clearly, the moment I stopped begging people to see my value and started remembering it myself. Emily wanted me to throw it away, at first anyway. "That dress has bad energy," she said one afternoon, standing in my closet with both hands on her hips. I smiled. "No, it has history. It has trauma. It has evidence." She gave me a look. "Evidence of what?" I touched the fabric gently. "That I survived a version of love that almost made me disappear." Emily's expression softened. After a moment, she sat beside me on the floor. "So what are you going to do with it?" I did not answer right away. For weeks, I had asked myself the same question. Part of me wanted to burn it. Part of me wanted to lock it away. Part of me wanted to donate it and never see it again. But none of those felt right, because the dress was not the thing that had hurt me. People had. The dress had only revealed them. So I took it to a small tailor across town. An older woman named Mrs. Ness Rivera owned the shop. She had kind eyes, silver hair, and hands that moved over fabric like she was reading a language. When I showed her the stain, she did not ask intrusive questions. She only touched the damaged area gently and said, "Some marks should not be hidden. They should be transformed." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "Let me show you." Over the next few weeks, Mrs. Rivera changed the dress. She shortened the skirt, removed the bridle train, adjusted the neckline. Then over the faded wine stain, she embroidered deep red flowers, not to cover it completely, but to turn it into something intentional, something beautiful. When I saw the finished dress, I almost cried. It no longer looked like a wedding gown. It looked like a new beginning. White fabric, red flowers, a scar turned into design. A wound turned into proof that I was still here. I wore it to the opening of my father's newest hotel, not because I wanted to make a statement. At least, that was what I told myself. But when I stepped into the lobby that evening, cameras flashing softly in the background, I felt different. Not hidden, not disguised, not pretending to be smaller than I was. For years, I had believed hiding my family name protected me. In some ways, it had. It helped me see who people were before they knew what I had. But after Helen, I learned something else. You should not have to hide your strength to test whether someone will respect your humanity. The right people will respect both. My father saw me across the lobby and smiled. His eyes went to the dress, then back to my face. "You kept it." "I changed it," he nodded. "I can see that." There was pride in his voice, not because of the dress, because of what it meant. That night, I gave a short speech. Nothing dramatic. Nothing about Mark. Nothing about Helen. I spoke about hospitality, about how luxury was not marble floors, chandeliers, or expensive rooms. Luxury was care, respect. The feeling that someone saw you as a human being, not as a number, a name, or a price tag. I looked around the room as I said it, at the staff, at the guests, at the young servers trying to balance trays with nervous hands, at the investors in tailored suits, at the housekeepers standing near the back, proud but shy. And I meant every word, because I had seen what happened when people confused price with value. They became like Helen, able to recognize diamonds, unable to recognize dignity. After the speech, an older employee approached me. She worked in housekeeping. Her name was Maria. She had been with our company for more than 15 years. She held my hands and said, "Your mother would have been proud." I almost lost my composure right there in the middle of the lobby. "Thank you," I whispered. Later that evening, while I stood near the balcony overlooking the city, my father joined me. For a while, we watched the lights below. Then he said, "Mark sent a letter." I did not turn. "When?" "Last week." "You read it?" "No, it is addressed to you." I was quiet. "Do you want it?" I thought about it. The old me would have said yes immediately. She would have searched every sentence for regret, every word for proof that the love had been real, every apology for a reason to soften. But I was no longer that woman. "Maybe someday," I said. "Not tonight." My father nodded. "That is a good answer." A few weeks later, I did read the letter. Alone, in my apartment, Mark's handwriting was familiar, careful, slightly uneven when he was nervous. He did not ask me to come back. He did not blame his mother. He did not try to explain away what happened. He wrote about therapy, about moving out of Helen's house, about finally seeing how much of his life had been built around avoiding her disappointment. He wrote that he was learning the difference between peace and fear. He wrote that he hoped I was happy. And at the end he wrote, "The day you walked away, I thought I had lost the woman I loved, but now I understand I had lost her long before that. I lost you every time I stayed silent." I folded the letter carefully. Then I placed it in a drawer, not because I wanted to hold on to him, but because some apologies deserve to be acknowledged even when they do not change the ending. As for Helen, I heard about her occasionally, not from Mark, from the circles she had once tried so desperately to control. The Whitmore family sold one of their properties 6 months after the wedding, then another. Their social invitations became fewer. The people Helen used to impress became polite from a distance. Not cruel, just distant. That was probably worse for her. Helen had built her life around being welcomed into rooms. Now doors still opened, but not as widely. People still smiled, but not as warmly. They had seen too much, and in a world obsessed with reputation, public cruelty is difficult to perfume. 1 year after the wedding that never happened, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note, only 2 lines. "I judged you by the price of your dress because I was terrified of the price of my own emptiness. I am sorry." It was signed Helen. I read it twice, then placed it beside Mark's letter. I did not cry. I did not smile. I only sat there for a while, feeling something quiet settle inside me. Not forgiveness exactly. Not anger either. Something closer to release. Because I had learned that closure does not always arrive with justice. Sometimes it arrives when you stop needing the people who hurt you to fully understand what they did. Some people change. Some people do not. Some people apologize because they are sorry. Some apologize because consequences have made pride too expensive. But healing cannot depend on which one is true. It has to belong to you. 2 years later, I visited that little coffee shop again, the one where I first met Mark. It was raining, of course it was. I sat by the same window, with a cup of coffee warming my hands, watching people hurry through the wet street outside. For a moment I could almost see him again. Soaked suit, messy hair, awkward smile. A stranger asking if the seat across from me was free. I wondered what I would tell that younger version of myself if I could sit beside her. Maybe I would tell her not to give him her number. Maybe I would tell her to listen to Emily. Maybe I would tell her that love without courage will eventually ask you to bleed quietly. But then I thought about everything that had happened after. The pain, the truth, the dress, the woman I became. And I realized I would not warn her away from all of it. I would only tell her this. When someone shows you they are willing to let you be humiliated to keep themselves comfortable, believe them the first time. The bell above the cafe door rang. A young couple stepped inside, laughing as they shook rain from their coats. The woman's shoes squeaked against the floor. The man teased her gently. She laughed harder. I smiled to myself, not sadly, just softly. Life had continued, not the way I planned, but maybe the way I needed. I finished my coffee and stood. Outside, the rain had slowed. The city smelled clean, new. As I walked down the sidewalk, I caught my reflection in a shop window. No wedding dress, no ring, no man beside me. Just me, Sarah Bennett, daughter, businesswoman, friend, survivor. A woman who once wore a $50 dress to marry into a family that thought she was worthless. and a woman who walked away before becoming part of something that would have cost far more than money. People still ask me sometimes if I regret that day, the public humiliation, the canceled wedding, the whispers, the dress. For a while I did. I regretted not leaving sooner. I regretted giving Mark so many chances to choose me. I regretted letting Helen's voice live in my head for as long as it did. But I do not regret the dress. Never that. Because that $50 dress taught me something no luxury gown ever could. A person who values you will not need you to look expensive before treating you with respect. A family that deserves you will not ask you to shrink before letting you belong. And a love worth keeping will never stand silently beside the person trying to break you. So no, I do not regret walking away. I only regret that I almost forgot I was allowed to. And if there is one thing I want every woman to remember, it is this. Never marry into a family that measures your worth by what you wear. Never build a life with someone who calls their silence peace. And never mistake being tolerated for being loved. Because the right love will not ask you to prove your value. It will protect it, even when the room is watching. Especially then.